August 23rd, 1979. Coral Gables, Florida. 3:47 a.m. Five black vehicles stopped silently in front of Griselda Blanco's mansion. 20 armed men emerged, all dressed in black, moving with military precision. They were sicarios from the Guadalajara Cartel sent by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, who controlled all drug trafficking from Mexico into the United States. Their mission: capture the woman the Mexicans called La Madrina and bring her back to Mexico for a conversation that would determine the future of drug trafficking in America. What these 20 professional killers didn't know was that Griselda Blanco had been waiting for their arrival for 3 weeks. And what would happen in the next 2 hours would establish Griselda as the most feared and respected criminal in the Western Hemisphere. This is the story of the night a 45-year-old woman made Mexico's most dangerous sicarios kneel before her in respect. To understand what happened that morning, you need to understand the situation that led to this confrontation. In 1979, the cocaine business was undergoing fundamental transformation. Colombian cartels had perfected production, but needed new routes to transport their product to the American market. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo saw an opportunity. He controlled an extensive smuggling network from Colombia to California. His land routes were safer than the maritime routes used by Colombians. Felix Gallardo proposed an alliance. Colombians would provide cocaine. He would handle transport and distribution. In exchange, he demanded 50% of profits and exclusive control of all American operations. But there was a problem. Griselda Blanco. La Madrina controlled the most important distribution routes in Florida, New York, and Los Angeles. Her organization was so sophisticated that any Mexican-Colombian agreement would be impossible without her cooperation. Felix Gallardo had tried negotiating with Griselda for 6 months, offering increasingly generous terms. Griselda had rejected each offer with the same phrase: Mexicans can stay in Mexico. For Felix Gallardo, this wasn't just business. It was respect. How could the most powerful man in Mexican trafficking allow a woman to dictate terms of his expansion? The 20 sicarios who surrounded Griselda's mansion were the best Mexican money could buy. Their leader was El Sombra, an ex-military deserter who had never failed a mission. At 3:47 a.m., El Sombra gave the order to advance. His men moved like a perfectly oiled machine, surrounding the mansion, neutralizing security systems, taking control positions. According to intelligence, Griselda was alone except for 2 sleeping bodyguards. Resistance would be minimal. But when El Sombra and his men entered the mansion, they found something unexpected. Griselda Blanco was completely awake, sitting in her living room, drinking coffee as if it were a normal morning. "Good morning, gentlemen," Griselda said in perfect Spanish, showing no sign of surprise or fear. "I was expecting you." El Sombra raised his weapon, but something in Griselda's attitude made him hesitate. "Mrs. Blanco," El Sombra said, keeping his weapon pointed at her, "my boss requires your presence in Mexico to discuss business matters." Griselda smiled slightly. "Your boss? Does Felix Gallardo consider himself my superior? He is the godfather of Mexican drug trafficking. You should show respect." "Respect," Griselda repeated. "It's interesting you mention that word, because I think there's confusion about who should respect whom." She rose slowly from her chair, ignoring the 20 weapons pointed at her. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, walking toward El Sombra with supernatural calm. "We know exactly who you are," El Sombra replied. "That's why we're here." "No," Griselda said, stopping 3 feet away. "If you knew who I really am, you would never have made the mistake of coming to my house uninvited." Something changed in the room's atmosphere. The Mexican sicarios began to feel an uneasiness they couldn't explain. "Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Griselda Blanco, and for 15 years I have built the most sophisticated cocaine empire in the Western world. I have survived 3 cartel wars, eliminated over 40 competitors, and converted the cocaine business from amateur operation into billion-dollar industry." Her voice was soft, but every word resonated like a threat. "More importantly, I have achieved all this without ever depending on any man, without bowing to any authority, and without asking permission to operate in territory I consider mine." Griselda began walking around the room, speaking with a general's authority. "But Felix Gallardo has made 3 fundamental errors. First, he underestimated my intelligence. Second, he underestimated my organization. And third, he underestimated what happens when someone threatens something I consider mine." At that moment, the mansion's lights turned on completely, revealing something that made the Mexican sicarios freeze. From every window, every door, every strategic point around the property, snipers with precision rifles had the 20 Mexicans in their sights. Red laser dots from telescopic sights moved slowly across each sicario's chest and head. "Gentlemen," Griselda said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I'd like to introduce you to my security team. 50 of the best marksmen money can buy. All ex-military, all with specific orders about what to do if someone threatens my life." El Sombra looked around, calculating odds. 20 men against 50 strategically positioned snipers. No possibility of survival if they initiated a shootout. "But don't worry," Griselda continued. "I didn't bring you here to kill you. I brought you here to educate you." She walked to a coffee table with carefully organized documents. "For 6 months, while Felix Gallardo planned this operation, I have been studying his organization. I have identified each transport route, located each laboratory, documented every major financial transaction." She lifted a thick folder of photographs and documents. "I have also established contact with each of his competitors. The Tijuana, Juarez, and Sonora cartels would be very interested in detailed information about Guadalajara operations. More interesting still," she continued, "I have discovered that Felix Gallardo has been hiding information from his own partners. His real profits are double what he's reported. He maintains secret bank accounts in Switzerland and Panama. This was information that not even Felix Gallardo's closest lieutenants knew." "Now," Griselda said, returning to her chair, "we're going to discuss how this situation will proceed. You have 2 options. First, try to complete your mission. You can try to capture me, resist my snipers, bet your lives against mine. If you choose this, I guarantee none of you will see dawn, and by tomorrow night, Felix Gallardo's organization will be dismantled by his enemies using information I provide." She paused for effect. "Your second option is much more intelligent. Recognize that you've been outmaneuvered by a superior strategist. Show the respect you should have shown from the beginning, and return to Mexico with a message that will save both your lives and your boss's organization." El Sombra slowly lowered his weapon. The logic was inescapable.
"What message do you want us to carry?"
Griselda smiled genuinely for the first time that night. "Tell Felix Gallardo that Griselda Blanco recognizes his power in Mexico, but he must recognize hers in the United States. We are potential partners, but only if he understands that partnership must be based on mutual respect, not intimidation." She stood and walked toward El Sombra, extending her hand. "Tell him I'm willing to discuss cooperation terms, but future discussions must be held between equals. I don't accept orders, threats, or armed men coming to my house in the middle of the night." El Sombra shook her extended hand. "Also tell him," Griselda added, "that if he ever underestimates me again, next time I won't be so diplomatic." But Griselda wasn't finished. "However, before you leave, there is protocol that must be followed. You came to my house as invaders. You cannot leave as equals until you acknowledge your error." El Sombra frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you and your men are going to show the respect that should have been shown from the beginning. You are going to acknowledge that I am the authority in this territory, just as Felix Gallardo is the authority in his—" The room filled with tension again. "I want you and each of your men to kneel and apologize for entering my house without permission." El Sombra remained motionless. It was humiliation that could cost him his position, possibly his life. But Griselda had perfectly calculated the psychology. The laser dots continued moving across each Mexican's chest. The alternatives were temporary humiliation or permanent death. Slowly, El Sombra knelt. "Mrs. Blanco," he said, "I apologize for entering your house without invitation. I acknowledge that we showed disrespect." One by one, the other 19 sicarios followed suit, kneeling in Griselda Blanco's living room. "Apologies accepted," Griselda said graciously. "Now stand up and carry my message to your boss." When the 20 Mexicans rose and began leaving, Griselda had one last thing to say. "El Sombra," she called, "tell Felix Gallardo that if he decides to accept my cooperation proposal, future meetings will be on neutral territory with representatives from both sides and with mutual respect that corresponds to successful business partners." When the last Mexican vehicles disappeared into the darkness, Griselda poured herself another cup of coffee and sat waiting for sunrise. She had accomplished something no one in drug trafficking had ever accomplished. She had forced Mexico's most feared sicarios to kneel before her without firing a single shot. But more importantly, she had established a precedent that would forever change power dynamics between Colombian and Mexican cartels. 3 weeks later, Felix Gallardo requested a meeting. It was held on neutral territory in Panama with representatives from both organizations present as witnesses. The agreement that emerged established Griselda as the only Colombian authorized to coordinate directly with Mexican operations. Felix Gallardo maintained control of his land routes, but recognized Griselda's authority over final distribution in American territory. More importantly, the agreement established the principle that women in drug trafficking could be equal partners, not subordinates in international operations. The night Griselda Blanco made Mexican sicarios kneel became legend in the criminal world. Not because it demonstrated violent superiority, but because it demonstrated strategic intelligence over brute force. Griselda had understood something many men in the business never grasped. Real power doesn't come from the ability to intimidate, but from the ability to make intimidation unnecessary. She had converted an armed invasion into a diplomacy lesson, a death threat into a business opportunity, and a demonstration of masculine force into an assertion of feminine authority. The 20 sicarios who arrived to capture a woman left having learned they had found their superior, and Felix Gallardo learned there was at least one person in the world he couldn't intimidate: La Madrina. Because Griselda Blanco had built her empire not just on fear, but on respect. And respect, once earned, is much more powerful than fear. That's the lesson the Mexicans learned that night, that the world's most dangerous woman wasn't dangerous because she was cruel, but because she was unpredictable, intelligent, and absolutely unstoppable when protecting what she considered hers. And what Griselda Blanco considered hers, no one else could take from her. Not even with 20 armed men. Not even in the middle of the night. Not even being the godfather of Mexican drug trafficking. Because some people build empires that can be conquered. But Griselda Blanco had built something more. She had built a reputation. And reputations can't be conquered. They can only be respected. And that night, the Mexicans learned to respect La Madrina. On their knees,